Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Inflamed in the Brain podcast. I'm Krissy, your host and friendly neighborhood dietitian, and I'm so happy that you're here today because we are diving into a topic that so many of us wrestle with, and that is cravings. Cravings have this negative connotation associated with them because we tie them directly to our willpower. When those cravings hit hard, it can feel like they're in control, leading us to eventually give in and eat all of the foods that we've been trying to cut back on for our health. And when we do cave, it's easy to feel like we failed, like we're weak or we're lacking self control. I can't tell you how many people I speak to that blame their lack of success on their diet to cravings. So they end up quitting the diet, they feel shameful, they feel like they couldn't do it. But then they go on shortly afterwards and start another diet without giving any kind of thought to what might have caused those cravings in the first place. It honestly feels like a trap sometimes. You want to be healthier, right? But you also want to feel better without wanting those cravings. Nobody wants to feel cravings for food forever. And to be clear, when I say cravings, I'm not talking about like a simple, I can go for a cookie today. I'm talking about like those real intense cravings where you can't stop thinking about that like ooey gooey chocolate chip cookie. It preoccupies your thoughts where you can almost taste the warm, melted chocolate, and it's like perfectly crisp on the edges, but then like soft and chewy in the center. At first, you try to ignore it, right? You tell yourself, I don't need the cookie, I'll be fine. So instead, you just reach for something healthier, maybe some fruit, maybe a handful of nuts, or some low calorie snack bar, but it's just not hitting the spot. So then the craving lingers and it gets louder and louder until it's almost screaming at you. And you keep eating more of those substitutes, hoping that one of them will finally satisfy you, but nothing really does. So you almost get frustrated with yourself. And then eventually you're like, fuck it, I'm just gonna go and eat my favorite cookie. But instead of eating just one cookie, you down like four or five of those cookies all to yourself. And then you feel incredibly guilty afterwards and you feel like a failure. And this is the kind of cycle that leads us to overeating. This kind of like depriving and then overeating, this is the cycle that I'm trying to help you avoid in order to lower inflammation for good. And I just also want to be clear, cravings don't go away. It's like a relentless itch that you can't scratch. And when you don't scratch it, the urge to want to scratch just gets more and more and more intense. And then, like when you do have those itches, you just scratch like crazy. And it's almost like you can't stop scratching. So it's kind of like a craving, right? You ignore the craving and then it just gets louder and louder and louder. And then you kind of just zonk out and overeat on that one particular food or foods. It's frustrating. It's exhausting, but it's also really normal and almost expected to have cravings under certain circumstances. So, today we're going to break it down and we're going to figure out why these kinds of cravings happen and how to stop it. Today's episode is dedicated to two things that you want to stop doing in order to stop having those cravings. And the first thing that you want to stop doing is cutting back on your calories and portions because you're following some kind of diet. I know that a lot of people go on diets in order to be healthier. I mean, I will even admit I became a dietitian because I wanted to figure out what was the best diet out there. Like what diet is everyone supposed to be eating? But now, how many years later, I know that diet culture reinforces this kind of mindset, telling us to count every bite and constantly monitoring how much we're eating like it's a measure of our worth. Skipping meals or restricting portions is often seen as a badge of honor. It's almost like a sign of discipline and willpower. But in reality, this approach is setting a beautiful foundation for cravings. And I know that a lot of people don't go on a diet like, I'm going to go on a diet because I want to cut back on my food portions and I want to eat less. A lot of people don't willingly know that as they're going into a diet, but all in all diets are meant to restrict how much food you're eating. And that is going to contribute to cravings. But by trying to beat cravings with restriction, so a lot of people who do end up feeling like they do have cravings, they feel like they just need to be more strict with themselves. They need to be more regimented. They need to have more willpower, but by trying to beat those cravings with restriction, you're actually making those cravings stronger. And diet culture is a strong contributor to why we feel like we need to restrict. But I think in the world of inflammation, many of us also restrict out of food fear. And I can definitely attest to that. It's like if you're dealing with a new diagnosis, the concept of eating certain foods can be scary. When I was first diagnosed with MS, I was terrified to eat anything that even smelled like inflammation. Many of us are also driven by fear of weight gain or the belief that eating less is healthier. We're taught that smaller bodies and smaller portions are the ultimate goals, so we buy into the idea that less is more. This mentality tells us that we need to constantly control and limit our food intake in order to be healthy and worthy and attractive, and it keeps us stuck in a cycle of guilt and shame around eating. But really, when you do restrict and then those cravings come, that's your body going into defense mode. Cravings are part of a built in innate survival mechanism that your body has to protect itself from famine. Your body can't tell the difference between intentional restriction, like being on a diet, and actual food scarcity. So it's going to fight back by triggering intense cravings. It's a biological response designed to make sure that you're getting enough energy and nutrients, pushing you to eat in order to keep you alive. Even if you're intentionally holding back for whatever your goal may be, your body can't tell that you're intentionally doing that. If you're on a diet because you want to fit into your wedding dress or you're trying to get a six pack or you're trying to avoid inflammatory foods, to your body, this all is the same thing. It's not enough food available and it's telling you we need to eat more. So it's going to trigger those cravings in order to keep you alive and to keep you safe. Calorie restriction doesn't just affect the body, but it also messes with your mind too. When you constantly tell yourself no, your brain fixates on what you can't have. The heightened focus on food creates anxiety, it leads to obsessive thoughts and preoccupation, and it often results in overeating. Instead of controlling cravings, restriction amplifies them, trapping you in this kind of like vicious cycle that's really hard to break free from. So, hearing this, I'm sure you're like, okay, well, the obvious solution here would be to eat more, but like, how do you know how much to eat? How much should you be eating? Calorie counting and measuring your portions might seem like the way to control how much you eat or to like know how much you eat. It's like a quantitative measure. But let's be real. You're not going to be tracking every single bite that you're eating when you're 80, right? You're not counting calories as an 80-year-old. Does your grandpa count calories? Probably not. But your needs will change throughout the different stages of life that you're in. So even if you were counting calories or your macros, whatever, those numbers won't always align with what you actually need. So instead of relying on rigid external rules, a more sustainable and realistic approach is to develop your interoceptive awareness. Interoceptive awareness is the ability to tune into your body's internal signals like fullness and hunger. So, similar to how we listen to our body's cues that tell us when we have to pee or when we have to cough, interoceptive awareness helps you connect with your body's cues that tell you when to eat rather than being influenced by diet culture or any kind of external factors like a schedule that tells you you're supposed to eat breakfast at this time and then 3 to 4 hours later you have your other meal or a snack. So interoceptive awareness is really focusing more on those internal cues. So, by recognizing your hunger and fullness cues, you're building that interoceptive awareness and you're learning to eat in a way that truly satisfies you without the stress of like constantly calculating and measuring. And building interoceptive awareness also is important because you're less likely to ignore hunger and overeat. So you'll eat when you're genuinely hungry and stop when you're satisfied, which will avoid that cycle of restriction and then binging. And building interoceptive awareness starts with actually paying attention to your food when you're eating. So, really, like, pay attention to your food. Slow down during your meals, eat without distractions. So, at a table without screens, really give attention to the flavors and the texture of your food. Check in with your body before, during, and after eating. So, maybe just ask yourself, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how hungry are you? And then notice during your meal when you start to feel satisfied, and tune into those sensations of fullness and thirst and even stress, just so that you can distinguish between like true hunger, like, am I really hungry, or am I just like being triggered by some kind of emotion to continue eating? The second thing that you want to do in order to curb those cravings is labeling food as good or bad. And this is what I like to call giving food a sense of morality. So, labeling foods as good or bad sets the stage for cravings by creating a sense of scarcity around those so called bad foods. When you tell yourself certain foods are off limits because they're bad, it makes you want them even more. This kind of like black and white thinking leads to food fear, which I think many of us can relate to more than you think. We have so many external factors like books and doctors and blogs and health gurus and influencers that literally connect food to death. Like, I think there's even a book out there that's called, some health book out there that's called How to Not Die or something like that. Like, there are tons of external factors and influences that have us fear food. And I've for sure been there. So, I mentioned earlier when I was diagnosed with MS, I was really like terrified to eat anything that was remotely anti-inflammatory, and I was constantly second guessing my food choices and wondering if like every single bite that I was going to take was going to set off another flare up. Like, I honestly believe that if I had a bite of my husband's sandwich that was using like gluten full bread is what I call it. So, if he asked like, "Hey, do you want to try my sandwich?" and I took a bite of his sandwich, if I sat on my leg weird that night and maybe my leg fell asleep and then I got up and I started to feel like, the tingliness, like when your leg starts to wake up, that's kind of how my flare-ups would feel when they first started, and then they would get like more intense as the days and the weeks passed by. So, whenever I had a bite of his sandwich and maybe my leg fell asleep that night, like, I honestly would be in tears thinking that that bite of a sandwich is gonna set off another flare up. And I remember, my husband would go and he would come with me to all of my appointments, so he would say, like, all the neurological examinations, like, does this feel cold? Do you feel it here? Do you feel it there? He would have me like squeeze his hands, like the whole neurological exam that he would always watch my neurologist go through with me, like just to make me feel better. He would go through them with me in our house. Um, but that was literally that's the fear that I felt by eating certain foods. And honestly, the anxiety didn't make me feel any healthier. It only fueled the intense cravings and made me feel more out of control around food. So, it even made me angry and jealous of other people. Like, I was angry that other people can eat a regular burger bun or regular bread without giving it a thought, but I had to second guess everything and be extra careful because I had this diagnosis. And this only made me want to eat the food more so that I could feel like a normal person. And not to mention that when you do label foods as good and bad, you avoid the bad foods by substituting them with the good foods. And when you keep substituting foods to avoid the one that you actually want to eat, you end up eating more foods unnecessarily. Like, have you ever wanted a chocolate chip cookie, but you're like, this is bad food for me. So you eat seven other things instead that might taste like a chocolate chip cookie, or maybe it's a healthier option to you. Um, but then you're still unsatisfied. And eventually you end up overeating those actual cookies. Not only could you have avoided eating all those extra foods that you didn't even want to begin with, but you also are wasting or spending what I call food energy. And not like energy like in nutrition, like energy is also like calories and macros. But I'm talking about food energy in the sense of the mental and physical effort of buying, prepping, cooking, and eating foods that you don't even want. Like, imagine wanting a blue shirt, but you buy every single color shirt because you're avoiding blue because, I don't know, you think you don't look good in blue. But you want that blue shirt, but you buy every other color shirt, and no matter how many shirts you have, you're still unsatisfied and you want that blue shirt. So it's kind of like similar with you want an actual food, but you deprive yourself of eating that one food. So you eat 17 other things, but you still want, even after those 17 things, you still just want that one thing that you wanted. And this constant cycle of substituting leads to feelings of frustration and can even make you feel guilty and defeated when you actually do allow yourself to have that one thing. So, by just allowing yourself to enjoy the foods that you crave in a balanced way to begin with, that helps you break this cycle and it frees up your food energy for choices that truly satisfy and nourish you. And I know that this can be tough to stop deciding what to eat based on what's good or bad because honestly, I still catch myself doing it. There are times where I'll think or I'll say things like, maybe I shouldn't eat this one thing because it's bad for me. And it sounds ridiculous when you really think about it. But I know one thing that I do that helps me move beyond this almost instinctual way of thinking is to imagine foods going to hell or heaven. I know it sounds really, really stupid. I know. I don't even know how I got there. I can't even tell you, but it really does help me snap out of the thought. It's like a little mental check that reminds me of how silly it is to kind of give morality to food, to moralize food. It lets me take a step back and I have a little, that's pretty stupid moment. And then I ask myself, okay, like, what do you really want to eat now? At the end of the day, if you're really looking to avoid cravings, it's really important to let go of labeling foods as good or bad. Food doesn't have a moral value. Eating a cookie doesn't erase all the healthy habits that you've had or the other healthy choices that you've made. And then choosing a salad also doesn't make you better. When we label foods this way, we create unnecessary guilt and set ourselves up for the very cravings we're looking and trying to avoid. Instead, let's give a little more priority to satisfaction and enjoy foods that you genuinely want to enjoy, but in your balanced meals. And satisfaction goes beyond taste. It's about honoring what your body truly needs and craves. And by allowing yourself to enjoy these foods that you love, you're less likely to feel deprived and overeat later on. And usually, when people hear about creating balanced meals, they think, okay, eating carbs, fats, and protein, but eating the good kinds of fats and eating the good kinds of carbs and protein, not the bad ones. But again, creating balanced meals doesn't mean cutting out your favorites. It's about incorporating them responsibly, or how I like to say, responsibly. So, for example, instead of denying yourself a cookie and then binging on a whole sleeve later, maybe try having your cookie after a meal that had enough protein in it or fat. Pairing satisfying foods with balanced nutrition keeps you feeling full and happy and in control. I have an episode that I did a while back that goes into detail about how to create balanced meals, so I'll link to that in the show notes. But it's not about perfection, it's about creating a relationship with food that leaves you feeling satisfied and free from cravings. Remember, when you stop moralizing food, and you can use what I use, which is like, give yourself a laugh when you find yourself thinking about, like, is this a good food or bad food, or I can't eat that because it's a bad food. Like, literally laugh. Laugh at yourself. Picture a bag of chips with angel wings. And is it going to go to heaven or is it going to go to hell? Give yourself a little laugh, snap out of it, and then give yourself permission to enjoy it. Move on and know that what you're doing here is helping you break the cycle of restriction and then cravings. Remember, cravings aren't a sign of weakness, lack of discipline, or a reason to jump onto another diet plan. They're actually your body's way of signaling that it needs something, and often that something is more food or nourishment that aligns with your true preferences. When you restrict how much you're eating or the types of food that you're allowing yourself to eat, your body responds by intensifying cravings, and that's a sign that your body's protecting itself. It's pushing you to get what it needs. And this isn't failure. Again, this is your body doing exactly what it's designed to do. Restricting both the quantity and the type of food that you eat are the two major triggers for cravings. And they also set the stage for the fuck it moments where you're kind of just like craving the food that you want. You ignore the cravings, but eventually you're like, fuck it. And then you cave and overeat. These fuck it moments are what lead to overeating. And those moments are what we want to avoid in order to lower inflammation long term. So by letting go of the restrictive food rules and, avoiding that vicious cycle of deprivation and overeating, you're reducing the risks of those inflammation spiking overeating episodes. I hope that makes sense. The real key here to managing the cravings and inflammation isn't more control. It's just awareness and less restriction. Tune into your body's signals, honor your hunger and satisfaction cues, and let go of food rules that keep you stuck. You deserve to enjoy food without guilt and to feel good in your body. By listening to your body's needs and making choices that satisfy you, you can break free from cravings and achieve lasting balance in all aspects of your life, right? So you have balance in the way that you're eating, your health is better, your mental space is a lot more clear. So, again, just listen to what your body needs. Eat foods that are truly satisfying to you, and I promise you'll have less cravings. All right, guys, I hope that really helped. I hope that you found today's episode helpful. If you did, please share it with a friend, leave a review, rate the show. Also, send me a message. You can reach out to me at Better with Carbo on Instagram. I'm always down to continue the conversation and answer any questions that you might have. Be sure to check out the show notes for helpful links, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.